The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the Terran Federation building in New Geneva. President Jake Morrison stood at his office window, watching children play in the park below. 300 years had passed since the last human war ended, and those children had never known the sound of weapons fire or the fear of invasion. Jake turned back to his desk where Ambassador Kate Sullivan sat waiting. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, earned through 20 years of negotiating peace between alien species who seemed determined to fight each other. Today she brought news from the outer colonies. The harvest reports from Haven's Rest are excellent this year, Kate said, sliding a datapad across the polished wood surface. Governor Amy Richards says they'll have enough grain to feed 3 star systems. The Altarian refugees we settled there last winter are doing well too. Jake nodded as he read the numbers. Haven's Rest was one of humanity's most successful agricultural worlds, home to 50,000 colonists who had turned barren rock into fertile farmland. The planet had become a symbol of what humans could accomplish when they worked together, instead of fighting. What about the mining operations on Kepler-7? Jake asked. Production is up 30%. The Zephyrian trade delegation was impressed when they visited last month. They're talking about a new mineral rights agreement that could benefit both our species. The Zephyrians were reptilian creatures from the far side of the galaxy. Their empire controlled dozens of star systems, and their technology was among the most advanced in known space. For the past 50 years, they had maintained friendly relations with humanity, trading their advanced weapons technology for human food and medical supplies. Jake found it strange that such a warlike species would want to trade with peaceful humans, but Kate assured him it was normal. Many aggressive alien races respected humanity's commitment to non-violence and saw them as useful mediators in galactic disputes. A soft chime indicated another visitor. Admiral Lisa Carter entered the office, her blue uniform crisp and decorated, with ribbons that had nothing to do with combat. Most of her medals were for humanitarian missions, disaster relief, and scientific exploration. "Good morning, Mr. President," Lisa said, taking the chair next to Kate. "I wanted to update you on the fleet exercises near Proxima Centauri." Jake smiled. The Terran Defense Fleet conducted regular training missions, but they were more like elaborate parades than military operations. Their ships were beautiful vessels designed for exploration and diplomacy, with comfortable quarters for alien dignitaries and extensive medical facilities for rescue operations. "How did the new crews perform?" Jake asked. "Very well. Captain Ryan Brooks handled the rescue simulation perfectly. His team saved all the mock survivors in record time." Lisa paused, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Though I should mention that some of the younger officers have been asking questions about combat training." "What kind of questions?" "Basic things. How to target enemy ships, combat maneuvers, battle formations. Nothing serious, but it's unusual. Most of our officers focus on exploration and diplomacy." Kate leaned forward. "It's probably just curiosity. Young people always want to know about things they've never experienced. War is ancient history to them." Jake agreed. The last generation to remember actual combat had died decades ago. Modern humans learned about war only in history classes, where it was presented as a primitive solution to problems that could be solved through discussion and compromise. The conversation was interrupted by Jake's assistant, who announced that Dr. Helen Parker had arrived for her scheduled appointment. Helen was a xenobiologist who studied alien life forms, and she had spent the last year working with a team of Zephyrian scientists on a joint research project. Helen entered the office carrying a thick folder of reports. Her lab coat was stained with various chemicals, and her brown hair was tied back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired but excited. "Mr. President, I have some interesting findings from our work with the Zephyrian research team," Helen said, settling into the remaining chair. "Their biological studies are far more advanced than we realized. They've been studying human physiology in great detail." "That makes sense," Kate said. "Medical cooperation is part of our trade agreement. They're probably just trying to understand how to treat human patients." Helen frowned. "Maybe, but some of their questions were odd. They wanted to know about human endurance limits, pain tolerance, and recovery rates from various types of trauma. When I asked why they needed this information, they said it was for emergency medical protocols. Lisa shifted uncomfortably in her chair. What kind of trauma were they asking about? Burns, radiation exposure, decompression injuries, the kind of things you'd see in ship accidents or industrial mishaps. Helen opened her folder and pulled out several documents. But they also asked about combat injuries, projectile wounds, energy weapon burns, the effects of various toxins on human nervous systems. The room fell silent. Jake felt a cold sensation in his stomach, though he couldn't explain why. There was probably a reasonable explanation for the Zephyrian interest in human biology. They're a military species, Kate said finally. Their medical personnel probably need to understand how to treat injuries from all kinds of sources. It doesn't necessarily mean anything sinister. Jake wanted to believe that, but something in Helen's expression suggested she wasn't convinced. The scientist had worked with dozens of alien species over the years, and she had developed good instincts about their motivations. Dr. Parker, do you think we should be concerned? Jake asked. Helen was quiet for a long moment, staring at the papers in her lap. I don't know, Mr. President. The Zephyrians have always been polite and professional, but there's something about the way they ask questions that bothers me. It's like they're studying us for reasons they won't discuss. Admiral Carter spoke up. Should I increase patrol frequencies in the border systems? Jake considered the suggestion. Increasing military patrols might send the wrong message to their alien neighbors. Humanity had built its reputation on trust and openness, and suspicious behavior could damage relationships that had taken decades to build. No, I don't think that's necessary, Jake said. We'll keep monitoring the situation, but I don't want to appear hostile without good reason. Our peaceful approach has served us well for 3 centuries. Lisa nodded, though she didn't look entirely satisfied with the decision. Kate gathered her papers and prepared to leave for another diplomatic meeting. Helen packed up her research files, still looking troubled by the questions her Zephyrian colleagues had been asking. As his advisors left the office, Jake returned to the window overlooking the park. The children were still playing, laughing as they chased each other around the old peace monument. Their parents watched from nearby benches, confident that their children would grow up in a safe and stable galaxy. Jake hoped that confidence was justified. Humanity had chosen peace over war, cooperation over conflict, and trust over suspicion. It was a choice that had brought unprecedented prosperity and happiness to the human race. But as he watched the children play in the shadow of the peace monument, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that their peaceful world was more fragile than anyone wanted to admit. The first explosions lit up the night sky over Haven's Rest like deadly fireworks. Governor Amy Richards was hosting the annual Festival of Unity when the attack began. Thousands of colonists had gathered in the main square to celebrate another year of peace and prosperity. Children carried glowing lanterns while their parents shared food with Altarian refugees who had found new homes on the agricultural world. Amy was giving her speech about friendship between species when the orbital defense stations simply vanished in balls of superheated plasma. The crowd looked up in confusion as burning debris streaked across the dark sky like falling stars. Then the first Zephyrian ships appeared. The massive dreadnoughts dropped out of hyperspace with a sound like thunder. Their hulls were black metal, covered in weapon ports that glowed with deadly energy. Each ship was 3 times larger than the biggest human vessel, and there were dozens of them hanging in the sky like mechanical vultures. Amy grabbed her emergency communicator and tried to contact the Terran Defense Fleet, but only static answered her calls. The Zephyrians had jammed all communications except for one frequency, which crackled to life with a harsh reptilian voice. Humans of Haven's Rest, the voice said in perfect English. You will surrender immediately or face complete destruction. You have 1 hour to comply. The crowd in the square began to panic. Parents grabbed their children and ran for shelter while the Altarian refugees huddled together in terror. They had fled war once before, and now it had followed them to their new home. Amy tried to keep her voice steady as she activated the colony's emergency broadcast system. This is Governor Richards to all citizens. Move to the underground shelters. Immediately, this is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. But there was nowhere to run. The Zephyrian ships had surrounded the planet, and their weapons could turn the entire world into molten glass. Amy knew that Haven's Rest had no military defenses beyond a few patrol boats that were designed for search and rescue operations. 3. Star systems away, Captain Ryan Brooks was conducting a routine survey mission when his communications officer received the distress signal. The young woman's face went white as she listened to the desperate messages flooding in from human colonies across the border region. "Captain, we're receiving emergency transmissions from 12 different worlds," she reported. "They're all under attack by Zephyrian forces." Ryan felt his stomach drop. The TFS Horizon was a research vessel with minimal weapons and no armor to speak of. His crew of 30 scientists and technicians had never seen combat, and their ship was no match for a single Zephyrian fighter, much less an entire battle fleet. "Show me the tactical display," Ryan ordered. The main screen filled with red dots representing enemy ships. There were hundreds of them spread across human space, striking simultaneously at colonies that had no way to defend themselves. It was a coordinated assault designed to cripple humanity's ability to respond. Commander Pete Johnson stood beside Ryan's chair, his face grim. Pete had served in the Terran Marines before transferring to the Diplomatic Corps, but that was during peacetime. He had never actually fought anyone. "Captain, we have to do something," Pete said. "Those are our people down there." Dr. Helen Parker looked up from her research station where she had been monitoring the biological samples from their survey mission. "The nearest Defense Fleet unit is 6 hours away. By then, it might be too late." Ryan stared at the display showing the locations of Zephyrian ships. His small research vessel was completely outgunned, but he couldn't just abandon the colonists to their fate. Every human captain was trained in basic combat procedures, though none of them expected to ever use that knowledge. "All hands, this is the captain," Ryan announced over the ship's communication system. "We are proceeding to Haven's Rest to assist in evacuation operations. All non-essential personnel report to emergency stations." The Horizon changed course and jumped to hyperspace, racing toward a battle they had no hope of winning. On Haven's Rest, Amy Richards watched the Zephyrian ground forces begin their landing operations. Massive transport ships descended through the atmosphere while fighter escorts screamed overhead. The enemy soldiers who emerged from the transports were 7 feet tall with thick scales and glowing yellow eyes. They carried weapons that could melt through concrete. Amy activated her personal communicator and sent a final message to Earth. "This is Governor Richards of Haven's Rest. We are under attack by overwhelming Zephyrian forces. Our orbital defenses have been destroyed, and enemy ground troops are landing across the planet. We have no military assets capable of resistance." She paused, looking out at the burning city where families were hiding in basements and storage rooms. "Please tell Earth that we tried to follow the path of peace. Tell them that we never wanted to hurt anyone, but they came anyway." The Zephyrian commander who entered the government building was a massive creature with scarred scales and mechanical implants replacing parts of his body. He studied Amy with predatory eyes before speaking in heavily accented English. "I am battle leader Vex Thul of the Zephyrian Expansion Force," he said. "Your world now belongs to the Empire. Your people will work for us or they will die." Amy stood as straight as she could manage. "We are a peaceful colony. We have done nothing to threaten your people." Vex Thul made a sound that might have been laughter. "Peace is weakness, human. Your species has forgotten how to fight, and now you will pay the price for that mistake. What do you want from us?" "Everything. Your food, your resources, your technology. Your people will become laborers in our war machine." The Zephyrian leaned closer, his breath hot against Amy's face. "You will send a message to your other colonies, telling them to surrender without resistance. Any world that fights back will be destroyed completely." Amy felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "And if I refuse?" Vexathul gestured toward the window where smoke rose from burning buildings. "Then we will begin executing your people 100 at a time until you cooperate, starting with the children." Meanwhile, Captain Brooks emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Haven's Rest system to find himself facing the largest fleet he had ever seen. Dozens of Zephyrian warships surrounded the planet like a metal cage, their weapons trained on the surface below. Captain, they're hailing us, his communications officer reported. Put them through. A reptilian face appeared on the main screen, scales gleaming under harsh bridge lighting. Human vessel, you will surrender immediately or be destroyed. Your pathetic research ship poses no threat to our forces. Ryan looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Dr. Parker was monitoring the situation on the planet's surface, her expression growing more horrified by the minute. Commander Johnson stood ready to fight with whatever weapons they had available. This is Captain Brooks of the Terran Federation, Ryan replied. We demand that you cease your attack on civilian targets and withdraw from human space immediately. The Zephyrian commander bared his teeth in what passed for a smile. You demand? You are one small ship against an entire battle fleet. What can you possibly do to stop us? Ryan felt something stirring inside him that he had never experienced before. It was a cold fury that seemed to rise from some deep place. In his genetic memory, the echo of ancestors who had fought and died to protect their families. We can try, Ryan said quietly. The Zephyrian's smile faded. Then you will die with the rest of your weak species. As the enemy ships began to move toward them, Ryan made a decision that would echo across human space. He was one ship against hundreds, armed with tools meant for exploration rather than war, but he was also a human being, and humans did not abandon their own. All weapons target the lead dreadnought, Ryan ordered. We're going in. The news from New Plymouth arrived at President Jake Morrison's office at 3 a.m. His assistant woke him with shaking hands and red eyes, carrying a datapad that contained images no human had seen in 300 years. Mr. President, you need to see this immediately, she whispered. Jake sat up in bed and took the device. The first image showed the main square of New Plymouth, a peaceful farming community of 8,000 people. The second image showed the same square covered in bodies. Men, women, and children lay scattered across the ground like broken dolls. The Zephyrian soldiers had lined them up and killed them one by one to prove their point. Jake's hands began to shake as he scrolled through more pictures. A school where teachers had died protecting their students. A hospital where doctors and patients were murdered in their beds. A nursery where infants had been left to die alone. 3,000 dead, his assistant said quietly. The Zephyrians, broadcasted across all human worlds. They said this is what happens to colonies that resist. Jake closed his eyes, but the images remained burned into his mind. For 3 centuries, humanity had believed that peace was possible, that reasonable beings could solve their differences through discussion. The corpses in New Plymouth proved how wrong they had been. Call an emergency meeting of the Security Council, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Contact Admiral Carter and General Murphy. Wake up everyone who needs to know. Within an hour, the most powerful people in human space were gathered in the secure conference room beneath the Terran Federation building. Admiral Lisa Carter sat at the long table with her uniform wrinkled from sleeping in her chair at Fleet Headquarters. General Frank Murphy had flown in from the military academy where he taught ancient warfare to students who thought they would never need such knowledge. Jake placed the datapad in the center of the table, where everyone could see the images from New Plymouth. Several council members turned away, unable to look at the pictures of dead children. Ambassador Kate Sullivan stared at the screen with tears running down her face. How many worlds have they taken? Jake asked. Admiral Carter consulted her reports. 15 colonies are under complete Zephyrian control. 7 more are under attack. Our patrol ships are outnumbered 50-1 in every engagement. What about Captain Brooks and the Horizon? Lost with all hands trying to defend Haven's Rest. His last message said he was going to ram a Zephyrian dreadnought. Lisa's voice cracked slightly. He managed to damage their ship before they destroyed him. General Murphy leaned forward. Mr. President, our current military is not designed for this kind of war. Our ships are exploration vessels with light weapons. Our Marines are trained for peacekeeping and disaster relief. We cannot fight a species that has been preparing for conquest for centuries. Jake nodded slowly. He had spent his entire political career promoting peace and cooperation. Now he faced a choice that no human leader had confronted in 300 years. Fight or surrender? What are our options, General? Murphy opened a secured folder that had not been touched since the last war ended. There are contingency plans, sir. Project Prometheus was designed as a last resort if humanity ever faced extinction. What does it involve? Complete mobilization of our industrial capacity, conversion of civilian manufacturing to military, production, activation of weapons research that has been classified for 3 centuries. Murphy's weathered face was grim. It would transform our entire civilization into a war machine. Kate Sullivan spoke up from across the table. There has to be another way. We could negotiate, offer them trade agreements, find some compromise. They murdered 3,000 civilians to send a message, Jake said quietly. What kind of compromise do you think they want? The room fell silent. Everyone understood that the Zephyrians had not come to negotiate. They had come to conquer, and they saw humanity's peaceful nature as proof that conquest would be easy. Dr. Helen Parker entered the conference room, carrying a thick folder of research papers. She had been working for 18 hours straight, analyzing everything the Zephyrians had told her about their military capabilities. I've been reviewing all our interactions with Zephyrian scientists over the past year, Helen said, setting her folder on the table. They weren't just studying human biology for medical purposes, they were analyzing our weaknesses. She opened the folder and spread out charts and graphs. They know exactly how much damage human bodies can take before breaking down. They understand our psychology, our social structures, our technological limitations. This invasion was planned for years. Admiral Carter studied the papers. They've been preparing for war while we've been planning festivals. It's worse than that, Helen continued. Based on their questions about human pain tolerance and fear responses, I believe they intend to use torture and terror as primary weapons. They want to break our will to resist. Jake felt something cold and hard forming in his chest. For 3 centuries, humans had chosen to be better than their violent ancestors. They had built a civilization based on trust, cooperation, and the belief that intelligent beings could solve their problems without killing each other. The Zephyrians had proven that belief was wrong. General Murphy, Jake said slowly, tell me about Project Prometheus. Murphy activated a holographic display that showed industrial facilities across human space. Every major colony has manufacturing centers that can be converted to weapons production within 60 days. We have the technology to build ships and weapons that surpass anything currently deployed by any galactic civilization. Why haven't we built them already? Because we chose not to. After the last war, humanity decided that advanced weapons were too dangerous to exist. We deliberately limited our military technology to prevent another arms race. Jake looked around, the table at faces that reflected his own internal struggle. They were peaceful people who had never wanted to hurt anyone. But the images from New Plymouth showed what happened to peaceful people when they encountered those who respected only strength. What kind of weapons are we talking about? Dr. Carl Thompson, the theoretical physicist, activated another display. Quantum disruptor cannons that can tear apart matter at the molecular level, artificial intelligence systems that can outthink any biological mind, ships with armor that can survive the explosion of a star. And how long would it take to build these weapons? 6 months for the first prototypes, 2 years for full production. Jake closed his eyes and thought about the children playing in the park outside his office. If humanity chose the path of war, those children would grow up in a very different world. But if they chose surrender, those children might not grow up at all. There's something else, General Murphy said quietly. The weapons are only part of Project Prometheus. The real transformation would be in our people. What do you mean war changes those who fight it? Our ancestors understood violence in ways we have forgotten. If we activate Prometheus, we will have to become something we haven't been for 3 centuries. Jake understood. Humanity would have to remember how to hate, how to kill, how to destroy their enemies completely. They would have to abandon the peaceful philosophy that had defined their civilization. Mr. President, Admiral Carter said, I need to know what orders to give the fleet. Do we try to negotiate or do we prepare for war? Jake looked one more time at the images from New Plymouth. 3,000 people had died because humanity chose peace over strength. The Zephyrians had mistaken that choice for weakness, and now they were learning the difference. Activate Project Prometheus, Jake said. Contact every colony, every industrial center, every research facility. Tell them we are no longer a peaceful species. He stood up from the table, feeling the weight of history settling on his shoulders. And send a message to the Zephyrian Empire. Tell them that they have made a terrible mistake. 6 months after the massacre at New Plymouth, the first of humanity's new warships emerged from the construction yards orbiting Mars. The TFS Retribution was nothing like the elegant exploration vessels that had carried human diplomats across the galaxy for 3 centuries. This ship was built for one purpose: to destroy enemies completely. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her new flagship, watching the final weapon systems come online. The Retribution was 2 miles long and bristled with technologies that other species had never imagined. Quantum disruptor cannons lined its hull like the spines of some mechanical beast. Its armor was forged from materials created in the hearts of dying stars. Its artificial intelligence could process battle data faster than any biological mind. "Admiral, all systems are operational," reported Commander Dan Carter, Lisa's nephew who had volunteered for the new Terran war fleet despite having no combat experience. "The fleet is ready for departure." Lisa looked at the tactical display, showing 47 other warships positioned around Mars. Each vessel represented months of frantic construction as human industrial capacity focused entirely on weapons of war. Factories that once built medical equipment now produced guided missiles. Research stations that studied alien cultures now designed ways to kill alien soldiers. "Signal the fleet," Lisa ordered. "We're moving out." The human armada departed Mars orbit with a coordination that surprised even their own commanders. Despite having no recent combat experience, human crews operated their new ships with an efficiency that seemed to come from somewhere deep in their genetic memory. 3 centuries of peace had not erased the tactical instincts of their warrior ancestors. Their destination was Kepler Station, a massive Zephyrian fortress that controlled the approaches to human space. Intelligence reports indicated that War Prime Kethtar himself commanded the facility, directing the conquest of human worlds from his heavily defended stronghold. On the surface of occupied Haven's Rest, General Frank Murphy led the first major ground assault by human forces in 300 years. His Terran Shock Corps had trained for 6 months using combat techniques that blended ancient human warfare with advanced technology. The result was a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Lieutenant Dan Phillips crouched behind a ruined wall, watching Zephyrian soldiers patrol the streets of what had once been a peaceful farming community. His squad of 12 Marines carried weapons that could cut through the thickest armor, and their tactical computers provided real-time analysis of enemy movements. "Remember, these are the same creatures who murdered civilians," Dan whispered to his troops. "They showed no mercy to our people. We show none to them." The Marines nodded, their faces hard with a determination that would have been alien to their peaceful ancestors. War had awakened something in humanity that centuries of civilization had buried but never destroyed. The attack began at dawn. Human forces struck simultaneously at 17 different points around the occupied city, using speed and surprise to overwhelm defenders who had grown comfortable with easy victories. Zephyrian soldiers who had terrorized helpless colonists found themselves facing enemies who fought with a cold precision that confused and frightened them. Dan's squad moved through the city like hunters tracking prey. Their weapons fired beams of coherent energy that could penetrate Zephyrian scales and armor with equal ease. When enemy soldiers tried to take cover, the humans used tactical grenades that could destroy entire buildings. Battle leader Vex Thul, who had supervised the massacre of New Plymouth civilians, found himself trapped in the government building with a dwindling number of troops. He had expected human resistance to collapse quickly when faced with superior firepower. Instead, these new human soldiers fought with a ferocity that matched his own species. "They are not the same creatures we conquered before," Vex Thul reported to his commanders. "These humans fight like they want to die as long as they can kill us first." General Murphy coordinated the assault from his command post outside the city. Reports flowed in from squad leaders across the battlefield, painting a picture of overwhelming human success. Zephyrian defenders were retreating or dying at every contact point. "Sir, we have battle leader Vexthul cornered in the Central District," Lieutenant Phillips reported over the radio, requesting permission to eliminate him. Murphy felt a satisfaction he had never experienced during his years teaching peaceful conflict resolution. "Permission granted. Make sure he knows why he's dying." Meanwhile, Admiral Carter's fleet approached Kepler Station to find the largest concentration of enemy ships in known space. 300 Zephyrian warships defended the fortress, their commanders confident that no force in the galaxy could threaten their stronghold. War Prime Kethtar watched the approaching human fleet on his tactical displays. He had expected humanity to send negotiators begging for peace, not warships bristling with unknown weapons. Still, 48 ships against 300 seemed like acceptable odds. "All units, engage the human fleet," Kethtar ordered. "Show them the price of defying the Empire." The Battle of Kepler Station began with a massive exchange of fire that lit up space like a miniature star. Zephyrian plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes struck human shields in brilliant explosions, while return fire from the Retribution's weapons tore through enemy hulls like paper. But something was wrong. The human weapons were far more effective than intelligence reports had suggested. Ships that should have been destroyed by Zephyrian fire continued fighting, while enemy vessels exploded under the impact of technologies that defied known physics. "How are they doing this?" Kethtar demanded as he watched a human cruiser destroy 3 of his dreadnoughts in rapid succession. "Their weapons should not be this powerful." His science officer studied the battle data with growing confusion. "War Prime, their technology appears to be centuries ahead of ours in some areas. These are not the same ships they were building a year ago." Dr. Helen Parker, now working aboard the Retribution as a tactical biologist, analyzed Zephyrian defensive patterns from her station on the bridge. Her peaceful xenobiology research had been transformed into methods for defeating alien enemies, and she applied her knowledge with the same dedication she had once used to help them. "Admiral, I'm reading massive structural failures in their command ship," Helen reported. "Their armor cannot withstand our quantum disruptors." "Target their bridge," Lisa ordered. "End this." The Retribution's main weapons focused on Kethtar's flagship with surgical precision. Beams of destructive energy cut through layers of armor and shielding until they reached the command center where the Zephyrian leader had planned humanity's conquest. Kethtar felt his ship dying around him as human weapons tore it apart from the inside. In his final moments, he understood the terrible mistake his species had made. They had attacked a civilization that chose peace but retained the capacity for total war. Now that capacity was fully awakened, and it was more terrifying than anything the galaxy had ever seen. "All ships, this is Admiral Carter," Lisa broadcast to the surviving Zephyrian forces as their command ship exploded. "You came to our space believing we were weak. You murdered our civilians and enslaved our people. Now you will learn what happens when humans stop being peaceful." The remaining enemy ships tried to retreat, but human forces had surrounded the entire system. Advanced engines that could outrun any known pursuit system carried human hunters after their prey. Within hours, the massive Zephyrian fleet had been reduced to scattered debris. On Haven's Rest, Lieutenant Phillips stood over the body of battle leader Vexthul, who had died trying to understand how peaceful farmers had become efficient killers. The Zephyrian's final words were a warning transmitted to his surviving forces. "They are not what we thought. They are something much worse." General Murphy received reports of complete victory from all fronts. Human forces had liberated every occupied world and destroyed enemy resistance everywhere they found it. The speed and thoroughness of their success surprised even their own commanders. "Sir, what are our orders regarding Zephyrian civilians?" one of his officers asked. Murphy considered the question. The old humanity would have shown mercy, would have tried to rebuild and reconcile, but the images from New Plymouth had changed something fundamental in human thinking. "Secure them for now," Murphy decided. "We'll figure out what to do with them later." As news of the victory spread across human space, something had changed forever. The peaceful civilization that had existed for 3 centuries was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. They had tried to be better than their ancestors, but their enemies had forced them to remember why those ancestors had survived when others did not. 1 year after the Battle of Kepler Station, President Jake Morrison stood among the ruins of New Plymouth where 3,000 civilians had died. Behind him rose a massive memorial made of black stone, carved with the names of every human killed in the Zephyrian invasion. The names covered 47 walls, a reminder of the price humanity had paid for believing in peace. The colony had been rebuilt, but it was different now. Where peaceful farms had once stretched to the horizon, military, training facilities and weapons factories dominated the landscape. Children who survived the massacre now attended schools where they learned combat tactics alongside mathematics and literature. Jake turned to address the gathered crowd of colonists, military officers, and government officials who had come for the first annual Remembrance Day ceremony. His face showed the weight of decisions that had transformed human civilization forever. "Today we honor those who died believing that peace was possible," Jake said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. They trusted that reasonable beings could solve their differences through discussion and compromise. The Zephyrians proved them wrong. In the crowd, Governor Amy Richards nodded solemnly. She had survived the invasion and watched her peaceful world burn. Now she governed a heavily fortified military outpost where every citizen received combat training and every building contained weapons stockpiles. Admiral Lisa Carter stood at attention in her new uniform, which bore the insignia of the Terran Empire rather than the old Federation. The change in name reflected humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers to galactic conquerors. Her fleet now numbered over 300 warships, each more advanced than anything their enemies possessed. "Zephyrians mistook our choice for weakness," Jake continued. "They believed that because we preferred peace, we were incapable of war. They thought our kindness made us vulnerable. They learned too late that humanity's greatest strength was not our weapons or our ships, but our ability to become whatever we needed to be." The war had ended 6 months ago with the complete surrender of the Zephyrian Empire. Their homeworld was now administered by human colonial governors who ruled with firm efficiency. Former Zephyrian territories had been reorganized as Terran protectorates, their resources flowing to support humanity's expanding military machine. General Frank Murphy, now bearing the title of Supreme Military Commander, supervised the integration of conquered worlds from his headquarters on the former Zephyrian capital. His forces maintained order through strength rather than negotiation, and rebellion was met with swift and overwhelming response. "We tried to be better than our ancestors," Jake said, looking out at faces that reflected the hardness that war had carved into human souls. "We chose cooperation over conquest, trust over suspicion, mercy over strength. But our enemies saw these virtues as weaknesses to exploit." Dr. Helen Parker worked in her new laboratory complex on Mars, where teams of scientists studied captured Zephyrian technology and biology. Her research now focused on understanding potential threats rather than building peaceful relationships. The galaxy had taught humanity that knowledge was a weapon, and they intended to be the best armed. Ambassador Kate Sullivan had been reassigned as colonial administrator for the former Zephyrian territories. Her diplomatic skills were now used to manage conquered populations rather than negotiate treaties. She had learned that sometimes peace could only be maintained through the threat of overwhelming force. "The galaxy watched our transformation with fear," Jake said. "Other species that once saw us as harmless mediators now treat us with the respect reserved for apex predators. Trade flows according to our interests. Disputes are settled according to our preferences. Peace exists because we enforce it." The Tiant memorial ceremony was broadcast across human space, where billions of citizens lived in a civilization that bore little resemblance to the peaceful Federation of a year ago. Industrial centers that once produced exploration equipment now manufactured weapons of unprecedented destructive power. Research stations that studied stellar phenomena now developed technologies to eliminate threats before they could develop. Children growing up in this new world learned different lessons than their parents had. They studied the history of human warfare alongside the sciences. They trained for military service as naturally as previous generations had prepared for diplomatic careers. They understood that peace was not a natural state, but something that had to be won and defended. Lieutenant Dan Phillips, now a decorated veteran of the liberation campaigns, taught combat tactics at the New Plymouth Military Academy. His students were the children who had hidden in basements while Zephyrian soldiers murdered their neighbors. They learned their lessons with a dedication that impressed even hardened instructors. Some ask whether we have become the very thing we once opposed, Jake said, his voice growing harder. Whether our response to aggression has made us aggressors ourselves. The answer is simple. We became what we needed to become to survive. The transformation was visible throughout human space. Every colony now maintained significant military forces. Every civilian received basic combat training. Every trade agreement included clauses that favored human interests. The galaxy had learned that humanity's peaceful nature had been a gift, not a weakness, and that gift had been withdrawn permanently. Dr. Carl Thompson continued his research into advanced physics, but his equations now served both creation and destruction. The weapons he designed could shatter planets or protect them, depending on humanity's needs. The choice of which purpose they served belonged entirely to human commanders. We offered the galaxy our friendship and received betrayal in return, Jake said. We extended our trust and watched it used against us. We chose mercy and saw it repaid with massacre. These lessons will not be forgotten. The ceremony concluded with the reading of the New Plymouth Doctrine, humanity's declaration of their changed relationship with the galaxy. The document was simple and direct. Any threat to human interests would be met with overwhelming force. Any attack on human civilians would result in the complete destruction of the aggressor. Peace would exist on humanity's terms, or it would not exist at all. As the crowd dispersed, Admiral Carter remained beside the memorial, reading the names of the dead. Each name represented a choice humanity had made to trust in the goodness of others. Each name was a reminder of why that choice would never be made again. The galaxy had wanted to see what humans were capable of when their peaceful nature was stripped away. Now they knew. Humanity had not simply become warriors. They had become the dominant military power in known space. Their technology advanced beyond anything their enemies could match, their resolve hardened by betrayal and loss. The stars themselves seemed different now, no longer beckoning with promises of friendship and cooperation, but watched with the careful eyes of a species that had learned the true price of peace. Humanity had offered the galaxy their best nature and been punished for it. They would not make that mistake again. In the end, the Zephyrians had been right about one thing. They had awakened something that had been sleeping. But it was not weakness they had found in humanity's peaceful choice. It was restraint. And once that restraint was removed, the galaxy learned why some species should never be provoked. The memorial stood as a permanent reminder that humanity had tried peace and found it wanting. The names carved in black stone would ensure that future generations understood the cost of trust and the necessity of strength. They had mistaken peace for weakness, and in their error, they had created something far more dangerous than the warriors they had expected to find.